Hello, my name is Dr. Steve Edelson. I'm the Chief Science Officer of the Autism Research Institute in San Diego. Today we have a joint webinar between the Autism Research Institute and the World Autism Organization. But before we start with the presentation, let me say a few words about the Autism Research Institute, or ARI. We were founded by pioneering researcher and advocate Dr. Bernard Rimland in 1967. And next year, excuse me, next month begins our 58th year of monitoring, supporting, and conducting research. More specifically, ARI funds research studies, sponsors international support group network with 260 member groups, as well as a science network. We sponsor think tanks in person and online and regional. We publish original articles and books. We produce videos, webinars, and actually do quite a bit more. And tonight we're going to have Paul Shattock speak. First, we might say a few words about the World Autism Organization, but let me introduce Paul. Now, I've known Paul, I think, about 30 years, maybe a little longer. We were introduced by Dr. Bernard Rimland, and Paul and I converse almost weekly. We try to aim for Friday morning my time and late afternoon in Sunderland, England. Paul is a parent, which I'm sure I'll talk a little about his son a little later. Now, Paul, he's credited with some of the early pioneering research on restricted diets, like the gluten-free and casein-free diets. He also was one of the first one, if not the first one, to discuss the association between autism and pesticides. Paul is active in the World Autism Organization. He's past president, treasurer, and board member. And also, I think it's fitting that Paul speak tonight because he'll talk a lot about his experience and history of autism, at least with the UK perspective. And if you don't know, this year, 2024, marked the 60th anniversary of Bernard Rimland's book, Infantile Autism, in which he said it was not the parents' fault for causing autism, and he suggested it was neurological, genetic, and environmental. And as many of us know, that's what the research shows today. Starting, next month, it will be the 100th anniversary of the first writings on autism. And we hope to have maybe a special webinar to celebrate the 100th anniversary. Well, I see Petra has joined us. She's president of the World Autism Organization. So why don't I next give it to Petra, and after that, Paul, if you could give a talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm a bit late. I'm in the car right now. I couldn't be at home. And welcome, everybody. And I'd like to give a quick introduction to the World Autism Organization. Thank you for the Autism Research Institute for hosting this with us again. And the World Autism Organization has evolved out of Autisme-Europe in 1998 already, so we're over 25 years old. And we have been active all over the place over the years. Then our council members and executive members are also from the United States, from the United Kingdom, from Ireland, from Kuwait, from Turkey, and from South Africa, Saudi Arabia, and many other countries. I'm from Namibia. I'm the parent of Michael, who's 35, and I joined the World Autism Organization in 2000 already and have been a member ever since. And the World Autism Organization aims to improve the quality of life for services for people with autism and their families. And through research and also through providing networking on practical aspects, and our members, our council members and executive members giving their free time, because all of us are volunteers. We do not have employed staff. We give our free time to empower and inform others about autism. Thus, we have a website, which again today I got a nice note to say that it is quite helpful and people are using it. And the next year, we will be continuing with our online parent support groups or parent webinars, actually, which over time we'll put into like a repository where people then can view them at their own time and leisure. We also aim to improve services within lesser resourced countries. Again, a lot of it is online work, and together with our team and others who are interested, we then present smaller conferences. Currently, we are in the process of calling for bids for the next World Autism Congress, which will be held in 2026. And in January, we will be able to tell you who won the bid and where it is going to be. Thank you very much. And now over to Paul, one of the oldest members or the long-standing members of the World Autism Organization. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, wherever you are. Thank you very much. I'm very proud to be invited to do this talk. I've been waiting to be asked for some time now, but I'm glad that I can appear now. That is me on the picture there. It's quite an old picture, actually, about 1946, 1947, but I haven't had a better picture taken than that. So that's who I am, Paul Shattock, from Sunderland, which is in the north of England. I'm just trying to change the pic. That's right. That's my son, Jamie. That's why I'm here. As you can see, he was a little boy then. That was 54 years ago that he was born, and he's been a smiler ever since. He was perfectly normal when he was born, apart from the fact that he was yellow, whereas everybody else was white. Yes, he had jaundice, and that happens quite often with people with autism. But as the time went on, we realized there was something further difficulty for him, and it was diagnosed as autism, as I will talk about that. That's his 13-ish teenager look, and you see he's smiling again. He's a happy young man at the time. He's had some difficulties in his life, but now we're hoping he's going to come back to our part of the world to stay with us. This lady, Grunya Sukareva, was the first lady to write about autism at all. She didn't use the word autism because it hadn't been developed yet at that time. It was 1925 when she wrote about autism, and they called it schizoid psychosis in childhood at the time. But that's how it was first arrived at. The next thing we know about people with autism is that the first school for people with autism was opened in 1926, which is only a year after the other one. So that's in Copenhagen, and hopefully they'll be having celebrations about it in due course. So that was about 100 years ago. We've had 100 years of autism, really. And in that time, we still don't know much about autism. We don't know what causes it, and we don't know the best treatments. And we've been looking at that, and that is what our organizations are trying to do. Leo Kanner is usually regarded as the father of autism because he's the first one who wrote about it in a language in English, that is. And he wasn't that bad. But it says the little joke he put in: parents just happened to defrost enough to produce a child. That was a little joke, really, but we pushed it too much, really. And the other person who wrote about them very early on was Hans Asperger from Austria, and in 1944, a year after. But we didn't find out that he'd written about this until the 1970s when it was translated into English. But they're the three people who sort of started off the understanding of autism. And then another famous person at the time was Bruno Bettelheim, another Austrian man, and he was a psychiatrist, and he had very strong thoughts on what was causing autism. He wrote a book, The Empty Fortress, Infantile Autism and the Birth of Self. And basically, he was very much concerned that it was the parents were responsible. And he said autism is a result of refrigerator parents. And that was an insult, really. And people were not, persons were not like that. But that was believed by orthodox physicians at that time, as that was what it was. It was bad parenting that was causing it. And it wasn't for a long time that we were able to disprove this. As I say, through the 1970s, there were in the United States and the United Kingdom just a few medical experts who still accepted that the parents were to blame, but that still is the case in much of Central Europe, continental Europe. Anyway, if you go to France and Italy, it is still the common ideas about autism. And at least 2 fathers of people with autism murdered their wives because they believed that she was responsible for the autism. It's as bad as that. It was as bad as that. I hope it's better now, but it's taken a lot of wiping out. Now, autism, when Jamie was diagnosed in 1974, was considered a behavioural disorder. And so parents and teachers didn't have much to tell us. When I got the news that Jamie was autistic, I would say, well, what do I do now? And I was given a booklet about how to treat behavioural problems, and that was it. But there wasn't a behavioural problems with him. But that was what was the ideas then, which orthodox medical practitioners, even in England, responded with. Life was a bit grim, and for people with autism and for teachers who couldn't do much. Many professionals and local authorities didn't accept that there was such a thing as autism. And many parts of the UK, they did not accept autism. Sunderland is a place in the northeast of England, and they were with it and immediately sort of tried to think the right things for it. But certain parts of England did not have autistic children. There were none in Hull and anywhere close to Sunderland roundabout. There were autistic children. We had a question on television one day: how many autistic children in the north of England? And the official, sorry about that. The official number was 19. Not the 260 as that would be expected by the data that was available at the time. 19 in the north of England. And when I asked on television why there were so few autistic children in the north of England, they said, well, the north of England, autism tends to go with intelligent parents, and the north of England isn't noted for its intellectual qualities. And that was worth a lot of money to us when we were raising money to set up our school. Treatment at that time consisted of trying to contain bad behaviour, and some serious behaviour modification programs were using drugs, aversive therapies such as isolation, locking down, electric shock, which is still used in certain parts of the United States, denial of food or spraying the face with lemon juice. These are all being discussed and used in those early times, which did not please us parents. Autism was the responsibility of psychiatrists and psychologists, and it's inappropriate, really, to blame professionals in that for not understanding the sort of ideas that developed later on, and have taken a long time to sink in. Does autism exist? That's not a very good title to put there. But what I'm trying to say is, when Jamie was diagnosed, there weren't schools for people with autism, and so many children were diagnosed with speech and language difficulties and go to school where they'd be helped with that. Some were described as elective mute because they just didn't talk. They were trying to get them to do so. Bad parenting, we got the blame and had lessons on things, encephalitis. And as I said before, no, I haven't said before, I'm going to say it now, though. But the newspapers' ideas were that rich people had autistic children and poor children with low IQs were just difficult, just thick. And that was how it was looked up. It wasn't like that, but that was how it was seen. And we had to start our own school for people with autism. But this changed with one of my heroes, Mark Rimland, and his heroic father, Bernard Rimland, who has been mentioned. He established the Autism Research Institute, and at the time, I think he was a psychologist working in the American Navy. But when he came through, he dedicated his whole life to this work. And he was somebody we could talk to. He wrote a book about autism, which you can see the cover of on the left there. And he made a film about it, him speaking, which were way in advance at the time and the thinking in those days. I remember when I was at a loss and to know what to do and depressed and so on, I phoned him in San Diego, and he was very kind, very nice, and gave me a lot of advice. And I felt very much helped by what he said. There are many people who did not care for what he said, and an organisation with the name of Quack, I can't remember the rest of it, well, Quack something, was written about, and we were all in it. Bernie was one of their chief victims, and even physicians in England thought he was a charlatan there. And one of the first things I heard about him, he was a charlatan. And it wasn't. He was having to fight for the truth there. There he was, looking in his glory. And as has been stated, his book was published 60 years ago this year. And it's an important book. It took over so much of what helped us do what we had to do. And there he is, psychologist and parent of an autistic son, and he was a founder of the Autism Society of England. In fact, it was just a second society for people with autism in their native country, which I'll describe in a minute. But he would speak it as it is. The medical establishment has been the enemy of people with autism since day one. It's pretty strong stuff. And I heard him say that, so I wrote it down at the time. But that was how it was. They didn't have a clue. This chap here, you probably don't know, Steve Edelson took over running the operation, and I'm a great admirer of Steve and thank him really sincerely for picking up Bernard's baton and carrying on with it and improving it in some ways, and particularly in the scientific way, and in charge of that. He's a good boy.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah. I wish my parents were alive to hear that.
Yeah, we do appreciate all the effort that you put into. We may call you other things behind your back, but the things you've done, you deserve a medal. But the first autistic society in the world was British, of course, And Lorna Wing, the consultant psychiatrist, and her husband was a consultant psychiatrist, the mother of an autistic child, she's not going to accept that it's just that she's a refrigerator parent. And she was one of the doctors that would against these thoughts, and very strong, and wrote a very good book about autism, which I understood. And as soon as I read that book, I thought, well, of course he's autistic. It's as clear as the nose on your face when it's explained to you. But we didn't get that. And most doctors she had to fight against to get on her side. I just thought you might be interested in this little bit. This was the logo that a parent, I believe, made for the National Autistic Society. And you'll see that boy hasn't got a nose, or he looks as if he's crying. He's supposed to be just twiddling his fingers in front of his eyes, and that was supposed to be the logo. And that was the first one that was adopted largely throughout the world. This comment came from Max Planck, 1902, and I would not have believed it at the time. The new scientific truth doesn't triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light. You've got to wait for them to die, and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it. And I believe that now. It is, people find it very difficult to change their views and say, that's right, I got it wrong. Those stupid parents were right. But so often it has been the case that it's important that people like who I've been talking about have been there to fight the battle for us. And here's another chap I admire greatly, one of the pioneers, Carl Reichelt. As you can see, you can guess that he's from Norway, but he was the one who listened to parents. Parents spoke. He was a doctor, a researcher, and parents would talk to him, and he was the one who tested gluten, casein, and persuaded others to try and see if it worked or not. And it did. So I put him amongst my honorary experts that are there. That's the intro. That's how it started, autism. But the big issue at the moment, is there an increasing incidence of autism? It does seem that there's huge numbers of coming through compared to what they were. We wrote a paper on this in 2001. It seemed to be increasing in numbers even then. But what's going on now is incredible, a plague. There have been many of these graphs drawn to illustrate the numbers of people with autism in a year. But this is a lesson to you. Do not steal other people's slides by taking copies of them and then try and use them as your own. It's not very clear, but it's a very good graph showing the way that autism isn't diagnosed when you're born. It's sometime later there, and it's quite a lot later in some cases before they're diagnosed. This came about 2 years ago. I had a campaign in our new local newspaper. It said there are more than 1,000 people in Sunderland, mostly children, waiting to have a diagnosis. The end of 2022 is estimated there are 140,000 people waiting to be diagnosed, mainly children in the United Kingdom. They took the figure again last year, and it was 185,000 people, mainly children. And that's just for England, whereas that was the whole of the United Kingdom. So the numbers of people who are applying to be diagnosed is like that. Now, the figure that came out last week for the number waiting for diagnosis in the UK, in England, 234,950 just waiting to be diagnosed. That's not the number of autistic people. You've got to consider this has been going on for years and add them all together. There's huge numbers of people with autism, and not everybody is on this queue. You'll see here was that for our local cities. Sunderland in October 2021, there were 50 people. The next year, there were 65 people, new ones. These are all new ones coming in. And the next year, 2023, it was up to 120 from this same city coming through, waiting to be diagnosed. They haven't given us a figure for this year, so we don't know, but I can guarantee that it would be higher. My next door neighbour's child is in the queue now, waiting to be tried, diagnosed, and it's the same all over the country. And in the United States, I realised there, and many other countries, if you don't wish to have an increasing number like that, the recommendation I have is don't count to see how many there are. And the countries that don't count don't have these increased numbers, strangely enough. So the age of diagnosis for autism, Jamie was 4.5 in 1974 when he was diagnosed. It was very good, really. That was about the average in England. By 2003, it had gone up to 3.5. We did a study on that to see what age people were diagnosed, and it's exactly the same as in London. So that was the sort of age where people were being diagnosed. Now, the average age of diagnosis is 8 years, which is too late. You've missed the biggest opportunities to help the children, and it's an absolute disgrace. That's one of the reasons we are fighting things here, and in particular, trying to get a biomedical an answer to this, so we can diagnose that way. The waiting list is 4 years on average, but as I say, there's more than that. Next section. Are children with autism the same all over the world? I assumed they were. They had autism and they would be the same. And then I travelled to Bahrain on a trip. A lot of people from Bahrain sent us samples, samples of urine, which we would look at and get a lot of answers from problems from looking at the urine. And I had to, I didn't know I was going to do this, but all the parents were there to me to discuss it with me. And it was a surprise to me. 10 of the children showed no signs until they were 20 months, and mainly 24 months. Most people weren't diagnosed with or didn't see the autism. They said their children didn't have the autism until they were about 2. And there may be a reason for that. So the fact that the Quran requires breastfeeding to continue until the age of 2 might explain that. Now, that's not quite right. In fact, the children were different. I did not see children like this in England at all, ever. These children were friendly. They came up to me. They wanted to sit on my lap and so on. I did not find that. I've never found that with children with autism in England. We use cow's milk and things like that. And I think that was the first time I realised that the children throughout the world are not all the same. Here's another one, a more dramatic example. Oh no, yes. I was in Sicily, Taormina, which is a fabulous little town, accepted an invitation to talk, and how we were partially successful in identifying autism from the urinary profiles. So I never repeated this experiment, but I announced the answers that we got there, and I got 13 out of 14 wrong. No, there were 13 there, and I got 12 of them wrong. And this was pretty upsetting because there were visitors from America there as well. So having one right, the audience still clapped at the end, which was fairly kind of them. It was awful. But Carl Reichelt said he had the same thing. Results from northern Italy are always fine. We're right when we do it, but not from the south. Why should people from the south be different? Well, if you went outside the building I was sitting in, you'd see that Mount Etna, the biggest volcano in Europe. And it's sort of, if you go past it at any old day, there's always smoke coming out of it. It's consistent there. And it belches out phosphorus smells and also mercury. Mercury is a liquid at normal room temperatures, but by the time it comes out of there from from volcano, it's gas, and it spreads all over the area, and it spreads onto the ground. And the children are different. They didn't obey the rules that we had, the ideas of translation. So one has to be careful about this, diagnosing in this way. But they're not the same all over. I've seen a similar thing in Indonesia, where there's huge lot of numbers of volcanoes. I think you've got more volcanoes than anywhere else in the world, and it does differentiate these people. Now a bit of chemistry. This is what you've been waiting for. We all love chemistry, don't we? Well, I taught pharmacy, so I did have some idea of the chemistry that was going on. And a lot of the symptoms we saw sort of smelt of tryptophan being involved. For example, tryptophan is an amino acid, which is very important, very common one, and it's used in the production of serotonin, or 5-HT if you're a chemist, serotonin if you're a zoologist. The serotonin is transmits between nerves, carries the message with it. And so it's necessary for that, but there's 4 routes it can go there. That's the famous one, and only about 8% of tryptophan goes there. 30-odd% goes along this kynurenine pathway, which I'm going to describe next. A little bit goes up through this indole pathway, but a lot of it, most of it, comes along this route, which we always treated as a drain. It was just rubbish. And so the bits that left went to become indole pyruvic acid, down here to indole acrylic, and then IAG, indolyl acrylyl glycine there. But I'm going to mention indolyl acrylyl glycine again in a minute. It's important. And so is the one before. I was at a conference once, and a man stood up while I was saying there was indole acrylic acid. He said, "That's impossible." But it's a flat, very active molecule. If that's there, the sort of environment, the skins around things, all the cell walls and things would be decomposing, and that is why the body has to get rid of it quickly to this thing here, this IAG. Other things we realised here, organophosphates inhibited some of these reactions, and the important ones it inhibited were in this kynurenine pathway, which is probably the most important one. That is IAG. I'll show you. I'm going to put it in the wrong place there. But tryptophan is converted, as I've said before, to serotonin, but it's also converted to these other things. And quinolinic acid causes epilepsy. Kynurenic acid prevents epilepsy. Quinolinic acid kills cells, and these other things keep them alive, because as cells get old, the body circuit kills them and new ones come in. Nicotinamide is used a lot for transporting things around the body. So it's all these things, serotonin, all come out of tryptophan there. But now what we did, we took samples of urine from people with autism and put them through this down a column, separated out all the components, and looked to see what was in there. We didn't know what we'd find. We had to look to see what was in there. Now, the problem here is that we did about 16,000 of these things, which we kept. And then when we were chucked out of the university, or they made it impossible for us to stay there, we had to destroy all the records for 16,000 people, which I had a few tears about. But this is for a normal person, so it's not mine. It has nothing much there. There's a lot of little things that are in the urine, and not much there. That's for a normal person. If you have a person with autism, we noticed we had similar peaks, but huge peaks for this stuff, which we had no idea what it was when we were studying it. It took us more than a year to find out because we didn't have the equipment. We tried lots of mass spectrometers to do it, and eventually we found out that it was that IgA. It was the compound that I was pointing out to you earlier. It's and there's huge quantities of that, and we can more or less use that as a diagnosis. But it seems to be there in about 73% of the people with autism, something like that. But it's not good enough for the total diagnosis based on it. This is one which I shouldn't be talking about. So after I stop talking about it, please forget I said it. We also had one of these charts. These ones we accidentally saved because we had them on our computer rather than burning them. And this one was a typical MMR type picture we got with MMR. There isn't the big peak for the IAG on this one. 19 there. No, that's the one. It's not there. Other peaks are there, but it's similar. But clearly the MMR people, there's a different mechanism being involved than in the other ones that I was talking about, the normal ones. And on the day we discovered this, it was Annie, one of our assistants, the cleverest one amongst a lot of us, who came to me and said, have you noticed that the ones with all these funny ones that don't fit are the ones where the parents say the MMR did it? And I said, no, I haven't. And so I had a look in the evening, and she was right. And I thought, wow, what's going on here? Now, in England, about between 6 and 7% of the people with autism, when you ask their parents, they believed that the MMR was responsible for it. And it was those people that had these charts. We did do quite a few in America, or an American colleague did these same sort of charts as we've got. And so I immediately telephoned these 6 or 7 people, because it seemed to me that whereas we got 6.5% of the people blaming MMR, in the United States, it was more like 50%. And I asked the first 6 people I phoned in America, and I said, was the MMR involved in any way? And they said, yes, it caused it. All 6 of them did. And I thought, this is interesting. This is different to what happens in the UK, where we've just got this smaller group of vaccine damaged children, and you've got half of them were. And then I thought about it, and I sort of realised comparatively recently that vaccination is not the same in America as in the UK. In the UK, most parents take their children to the doctors to have the vaccine. But in America, it's very common practice for the parents to go there about some other problem, and the doctor will say, well, let's give them his MMR now. And they'd give the MMR in one bucket, and they'd also put in chicken pox in the other buttock. And also children from autism had been vaccinated very early in their life with mercury and not very light metal, aluminium in their vaccines. That's not good. And then they gave them what we call paracetamol, acetaminophen or something like that. That's not good either. And so I think it was that treating that caused problems. And we did have some children where the parents said it was the vaccine. It wasn't the vaccine that did it. It was the paracetamol that they gave it. Was it? Now, could I ask you to forget that? This came at a very awkward time where you do not try and publish stuff like this. And I think you're the first people I've mentioned it to. But the argument is over now. We don't get any like this now, as if they've changed the practice of giving vaccines, or the vaccines are different, but we don't find any parents complaining that the vaccine did it now. That problem is gone. But to show you the difference, the control or normal people had smallish amounts of IAG that we talked about, and the ones who say that the vaccine did it have normal amounts, but the other ones, the ones with autism, not that, so they're quite definitive there. They were different, but we don't get any like that anymore. And I wonder if in the United States you're not getting people. Have they changed the practice? What's happened? A lot of people came to us to ask about their advice about what they should do, and we don't do that with the university as a rule. But we did produce a sort of protocol which could suggest things to people, so they could try this, and if that works, fine. And the casein we do first, because in 3 weeks you know whether it's worked or not, and then you can move on to the next one if you want to. And that's how we did it. We're not doctors, we do not see people, but we talk to a lot of people working in natural remedies who took this sort of thing up, and we need to do it again now. Another interesting thing was at this period of time, people were deciding that the genes, the genetic source were. So 80% of the research money that was being spent on autism was being spent on genetic work, by my calculations. But this is a very unusual paper, and it was signed by 137 people. In fact, they were agreeing with this statement that based on these results, we can say there is no single gene which is going to be the answer to this. Everybody was looking for the gene. There isn't the gene. It's the sum effect of them all go, and they said this was their sort of conclusion. Yes, there's no doubt that genes will have some effect, but not any one in huge quantity. It's there, and it probably, well, we know that it interacts with the environment. That's the whole point. Now, it's quite easy for people to view the same evidence and come up with totally different conclusions. This is a picture of football supporters from our local rivals in Newcastle and the Sunderland people on that side. They're waving to each other, arguing about who's the better team. And we've got the police riding around on their horses in between there. But you can see the same evidence and come up with different answers. We have to accept that. Now, this one, a young man called Bob Budd came into our laboratory one day and said, he was a psychologist student, and he said, could I come and get involved in this somehow? And we said yes. And we discussed where the people with autism came from. And we were quite convinced that it was environmental factors that were causing it. And so we tried to find out where the people lived. And so everybody who came in, we had this great big map of British Island on the wall. And every time one came in, he'd put a pin in, different colours for different things. And it was quite obvious that there was more autism in rural areas than there was in city areas. We'd expected the filth and dirt in city areas to be the big thing, but it wasn't. It's the rural areas that were doing that, which does indicate other things which are in the countryside. Wrote a thing on it. This is a magazine which you could buy in the supermarket. A lady called Polly Tommy was the editor for this one. And she just wanted to help other parents. If we would never get articles like I've just described to you published, nobody would touch them. It's like committing suicide, submitting the stuff that we were doing. But this was about organophosphate insecticides, and you'll see the date on there, 2007. We wrote this one, and it was published. And if you put your, at that time, if you put your paper into a proper scientific thing, didn't get read much, they'd sell about 200 copies. These were selling 55,000 copies, and from shops and so on. And it was excellent. We sort of ran out of ideas after a while, and I'll mention Polly again later. But that's when we first started getting noticed. And then in 2019, quite a few years later, 10, 12 years later, the British Medical Journal put an article saying, pesticides and autism, new evidence. Well, it was mostly the same as the evidence that we put forward, but it was taken and it was in the normal conversation. Our papers weren't mentioned, but it's okay. We're okay with that. And also, I just want to mention another place where there are problems. Farmers had to dip their sheep and cattle in a bath twice a year to stop the insects chewing the animals to bits. And they did so, dipping twice a year. The animal will be pushed his head under twice and then come out. It was dangerous. These were powerful insecticides, organophosphates on the whole. And one day I went along to help with the dipping, and you know how you sometimes get a rainbow effect over water like that, and that was you could see that it was air. It was all there, all evaporating into the air, and the people breathed it. And I think that all the farmers I used to go and do this with are dead now. It's not good for sheep and things. So after about 4 years, they decided it was a bad idea, and they stopped doing it. In America, they call it fruit pickers syndrome, because the same reason they've got too many things like that there. Now this one, it's just a slide I found from a long time ago, and I have no recollection of why I made it, but there's just this question of parental observation, involvement of intestinal microorganisms, those bacteria and funguses which are in the body. They share our body. And they're talking, the parents said antibiotics caused their autism. And I thought, nonsense. But I only just found this slide again just recently. But there's a lot of interest. Parents took a lot of interest in all these things. I'll come back onto that. Now, there was also evidence for the organophosphates. They interfered with passage of messages by chemicals in the body, and there were lots of papers published about autism. No, sorry, not about autism. About the effect of organophosphates in the brain, and you'll see some names you may recognise in some of these things here. Bauman M, for example, published a lot of them, and you'll see the dates: 2002, 2001, 1995. This has been known for ages that these are affected, and certainly organophosphates will affect transmission there, ruining all the ways that it should be done. It didn't really get picked up at all there. And this is the sort of newer one in a way. No, I'll believe that for now. Actually, I'm running a bit below half the time. Glyphosate. We had our eyes on this one. We knew it was nasty stuff. And it was originally produced as an antibiotic, as it was produced for, and small amounts it sold, but in England, a lot more of it was sold there. And then as time went on, a lot more was sold. It steadied off, so that made me think, no, it's not that that's doing it. But I did not realise they changed the way they used it, and they put it into stored product now. And it's a lot of it being used, and I do believe this is a big thing. Some of you may have come across Stephanie's book, this one here, which writes about it and became a bestseller for a little while. And I think she's right, largely right in what she says that these weed killers do and how it works. There she is, smiling away. And there's a book, and people walking around in this fog of this pesticide. The pesticide is called Roundup, is the trade name for it. And glyphosate is the name. But now, this is where it gets tricky. There's a pathway which plants have called the shikimate pathway. Shikimate kinase is in the middle, which does some of it, and there's shikimate there. But we don't learn about this in our chemistry lessons because it's plant chemistry. It's not physiologically present in animals. And that reaction that I was just showing you here is not relevant. So animals, in plants, they do get down to here, and glyphosate blocks that reaction getting any further than that. It doesn't do it. It goes down to here, should do, but this blocks it, so it's not producing the tryptophan, phenylalanine, and tyrosine, which would be expected. Now, it's not just big plants that produce this. It's bacteria. A lot of bacteria have plant origins, and they rely on this stuff. They make this shikimate system and end up with tryptophan, phenylalanine, and that's where we get ours from. We can't make it, but these animals can. Sorry, not these animals. These bacteria and viruses and fungal can make these things. But if we get them into our body, these same products that kill they would kill I can't recall the genes and things in the Monsanto developed an extremely powerful weed killer called glyphosate, Roundup. Monsanto produced a gene for soya plants so that they became immune to glyphosate if it was on them. And they could therefore plant it. And the glyphosate, if the gene is there, glyphosate doesn't have this effect, and tryptophan is produced. So those weeds live. Everything else dies. All other plants die. Trees, bushes, and weeds in particular, and these things in our bodies as well, almost certainly. Monsanto was the company which sold to Bayer. It's Roundup, and the patents are now broken down, and numerous other companies are making them. So the bacteria make these things in for us, but they're being killed inside our body. How is it being killed? The thing I wrote earlier, and I just picked up again a week or two ago. I went to one of the lectures in the series that Autism Research Institute does, and there was a lecture on this, and saying that I've written the word down. Antibiotics. That's it. But antibiotics will kill some of these things. Kill the good bacteria that we need to make it. Now, I haven't said that very clearly, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. But I've got to move on for time-wise. But it's not just that stuff that's causing problems. There's hundreds of things in the atmosphere. I call it toxic stew rather than what's the name again now? Stephanie's is everywhere. We know it's not just one mechanism, but I made this slide years ago, and I have no idea why I did, listing potential environmental triggers. And the last one I've got is infections in mother and or baby, use of ampicillin and cephalosporins. And there is evidence in the press that could happen. And we must be very careful. We should inspect it. I hate to think of the idea of poisoning my child and giving him autism by it. We've got to look at that more carefully. Now, as far as the weed killer goes, it was recognised that it was dangerous, and the European Union had a thing, and they banned it for a year. The people who make the stuff appealed and said, "Can we look at it again?" And Thursday, November the 16th of last year, they had another vote, and there weren't enough people there, so they said, "Yes, you can use it. For 10 years, you've got to use this very dangerous stuff." People won't take any notice of it. They're going to use it anyway. Now, but what were they doing in the States, the United States at the same time? The Environmental Protection Agency was ordered by the courts to rule that glyphosate does not cause cancer and is safe, and therefore it is. I don't understand American law, how courts can order this result to a testing. And I think, anyway, you may not know who this is, but he's well known, and he's the only president I know that wears a beaver on his head. So I've always liked him for that. But the other thing is that he was interested in autistic children, and his first, when he was being interviewed and for the job. And he said a lot about it quite strongly. But he didn't do anything. But this time it looks like he's going to do something, because he's appointed this bloke as the head of the medicines sort of industry. And he is a Kennedy, and he's Robert Kennedy, the son of the one that was murdered. and he is very green and he environmentally friendly. And he has a society which he's just resigned from because he's got this other job, probably. And my friend Polly Tommy works for him on this as well. Anyway, I'm going to finish any second now. Just get through these last bits. There's a lot of different things going on. And finally, after 100 years, we're putting together these pieces of jigsaw. Glyphosate is not the only toxic component in our environmental stew, and other diseases are going. If you think that glyphosate has caused your cancer, you're going to get lots of money for it, but they don't recognize these other things. I saw the advert for it today. Now, we're trying to find out what is the best product to use for which people with autism. So we've been developing a system where we can measure everything that's relevant in one stroke. All these things are there, so we know which treatment to give to which people, and we hope that professionals, people doing plant medicine and things like that, will be interested in it, and possibly normal physicians will be in the end. Anyway, we devise these scans, these tests, which are very accurate, 73% accurate at least, and we've got to get them better than that, and we will do. And you'll see that there are 3 dads working on this. There's me, Paul Whiteley, and Jim Adams, that some of you may know. There's some papers. Now, the other thing, the last thing I want to say is that we do know that people come with this strange autism-like problems. They're not as like Jamie Shattock's, nor they're all different. And we've got to accept that there is heterogeneity. Some of these other names which they've elected to give themselves, the people with these things, they're probably fair. They're probably meaningful, and they need assistance medically as well as anybody else. So we have produced a paper on this, which will be published soon. It's been accepted, which is good for us. And this is an early version of the sort of tests that we would do. How I'm going to, it's not an advert. We don't make huge profits on this sort of thing. We want to know we're doing the right stuff. And there's 2 guiding principles that we have. If it doesn't make sense, it's probably important. That's the one that Antonio Persico, who spoke with us earlier in the year, that was his sort of motto, and I've stolen it. And also, we've got to remember things. If something is there that's remember it and treasure it in your heart until it suddenly comes back and bites you later on. Now we're finished now. That's my son Jamie now, and I'm very proud of him. He's 54, and he's put up with a lot of problems in life, and he's a very nice gentleman now. No language, but he understands quite a lot of what you say. And I just put him off so that I know I've finished now. Okay, that's the end. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you, Paul. That was terrific. A lot of history there. But yeah, well, unfortunately, we don't have any time for questions and answers right now since we've gone over the 1 hour. But you can always write to ARI if you have questions, and we could forward those questions over to Paul. But yeah, Paul, thanks again. And next quarter, the Autism Research Institute and the World Autism Organization will sponsor another webinar. So happy holidays and talk to y'all later. Bye.
Okay, bye. Thank you for putting up with me. Bye.